Hey guys, welcome to the Inside Texas live show here on this Thursday night, joined by Pack. Pack, brother, you doing okay over there? Busy, student life in Austin, Texas, going okay?
Yeah, busy but good.
Good to hear, man. Pack and I, we're going to kind of get into under the radar Texas players, guys that maybe, it's an Arch Manning led team, of course, with some other players in there. But you have big names, you have some big personalities, guys that have been around for a long time, names that everybody knows, and just kind of some names that might surprise a few of you guys, us included. But first, guys, hop on over to Inside Texas if you haven't done so yet and take advantage of that $1 new sub sale. Come spend the long off season with the good guys over at IT. But all right, Pack, when was thinking Texas, obviously, Arch, Cam Coleman, everybody's made themselves, I feel like, acquainted with the new running backs. They've dove into film, they've looked at the numbers. We know who the studs are on defense, the people that draw, the guys rather that draw the headlines. But if I'm to ask you, who are the first under the radar guys that kind of come to your mind? It can be on either side of the ball. I don't care if it's on special teams. What players come to mind? You guys in the comments, you guys watching, throw some names too. If you believe a guy's going to step up and maybe he takes a big step, maybe it's a guy that everybody knows, but you expect a big step to be taken by that said player. Share it with us. Let us know what you think. But what do you got for us, Pack?
Yeah, so offensively, I think you start with Emmett Mosley. That's probably, the first one because really, I think offensively, it's kind of hard to have an under the radar guy. Feels like there might be, eight NFL players in the starting 11, and it's hard to say that an offensive lineman's under the radar because they're pretty much always going to go under the radar unless they're, up there for All American status. If they're going to be All SEC, outside of that, it's kind of hard to be under the radar there. So really, I'm thinking of skill positions, and it feels like everyone that Texas has from a skill position standpoint in terms of who they're going to walk out for in the first 11 is really, really talented. Is a guy that nationally is pretty well known. Um, they're all probably going to be drafted. So it's hard to say that there's one under the radar. If we're talking about guys that come off the bench, guys who are in the two deep that may not start, I think you think of guys like Kalik Lockett, Sterling Burkhalter, um, and that's kind of about it in terms of who you think is going to make a meaningful contribution, especially not knowing what the spring looks like for some of these guys, not knowing how much weight some of them have put on, like a Jermaine Bishop. He comes to mind if he can put on enough weight to be able to put on the field. But if he weighs 165, 170, you're going to have a really hard time getting him on the field. So it's hard to name him. And then defensively, a lot of guys come to mind for me. I think Bo Mascow. I recently, in the last week, went back and watched his tape at Rutgers. I really liked what I saw. Super long, has some technique stuff that has to get cleaned up for sure from a footwork standpoint at corner, but I think he does a good job with the ball in the air. I think he's comfortable playing as a quarters corner, playing as a deep third corner. I think he looks pretty comfortable in off man as well. So a lot of things you like to see from that. I think Wardell Mack's a guy that I've always been really high on. I think if he can really step into that role at star, I think that'll help Texas's defense a ton. I think he's physical enough to really help in the run game when they want to play stuff like mid four mod or anytime that they need to get their star in the fit in terms of as a force defender. So those are the two names defensively that come to mind. I think you could talk a lot about the guys in the secondary though, in terms of guys who are going on the radar, and even some of the guys uh, in the front four when we're talking about guys who maybe aren't talked about super nationally.
I mean, to me, when they added, we're gonna start with Bo Mascout. Like when they added Bo, and you have all these recruiting and bless you, all these recruiting and portal recruiting, just fanatics who want the biggest names. They want all the stars. They want stats at the last school that they were at. And then Texas takes, a former 3-star from Rutgers. And to the fan base, that do I have an issue with it? Absolutely not. I'm going to trust the staff, especially on the defensive side, and then I'm going to go get into film and make my own opinion. But it's just not the big, sexy name that a lot of people want, and it doesn't really move the needle for a lot of fans. The more that I've seen his tape, the more that I get into it, he's going to be a big part of this defense. How dependent is Texas's defense and being a quality defense, especially on that back end, dependent on Texas hitting on Bo Mascow?
I don't know that it is just because I think there's a lot of depth there. If he doesn't hit, as long as Kobe Black hits, as long as Grayson Littleton hits, as long as Cade Phillip hits, as long as, Samari Matthews is playable, Warren Roberson is playable, you can kind of get away with it. Now, if he is a real plus and it's a hit, then that gives you a lot of depth, right? It allows you to maybe try Kobe Black out at star, allows you
Yep.
to move Warren Robertson somewhere, allows you to do some different things with Wardell Mack as well. So I would say him being a hit only helps the depth. I'm not so sure that him hitting is a necessity for the Texas defense being really good.
No, that's fair. I just wanted your thoughts on it. I think he has a really good chance to be, I mean, arguably the best cornerback on the team. I think he's going to be a top half dozen cornerback in the SEC by the time everything shakes out. Again, could be a little bit of bias in there, but man, I'm just really falling in love with the tape of Bo Mascow. Excited to see him as part of that defense. Now let's talk about this. Kobe Black, a guy that you saw play his best football later in the season. Warren Robertson, another guy you could say played his best football late in the season. Wardell Mack, let's throw his name in that trio as well. Which of those three do you envision taking the biggest leap into 2026?
You would think it would be Kobe Black because this is probably, in terms of a scheme fit, a really good one for him. From a standpoint of, Muschamp's going to play some press, he's going to play some off man, but in general, a lot of what Texas is going to play has some man principles. If you had been watching the Saturday shows that I do with Homer and Ian, you can see that a lot of the coverages that Muschamp's going to run have a lot of man principles, especially outside. It's almost exclusively man outside, and then what happens inside dictates the coverage structure. So, because of that, you'd think this would be Kobe Black's best fit in terms of where he's going to be maximized. And then with Warren Roberson, I think the question has always been, from a processing standpoint, how quickly can he pick up the playbook? How quickly can he, see something to actually do it? So, and, with Muschamp's defense, it's not less complicated than Pete Kwiatkowski's. It's very much the opposite, especially from a back end standpoint. They do a hell of a lot more, the Saban guys do, than PK does. So that's a little bit of a hesitation there. With Wardell Mack, you just hope that he can eventually figure it out because I think out of those three, he's the one that I think has the high ceiling just from a height, weight, speed standpoint. Um, I've liked his tape the most, honestly, especially when you consider early in the year. So that's kind of Kobe Black is the highest potential in terms of the thing that's going to benefit him the most. But I would say I think it's probably going to be Wardell Mack.
There's a lot of raw skills there. There's a lot of raw potential. I definitely, I hate to like rank the guys, but I think you can make an argument for Wardell or for Kobe Black. Again, for the reasons that you said with Kobe Black and coaching, probably going to have this coaching staff, especially in the back end, is going to, it's going to be, or his coaches on the backside are going to be, a little bit more in tune with maybe what he's capable of doing and what type of like what type of traits he physically has. As far as Robertson, it's going to be an extensive playbook, man. And so all these guys, we're going to see if they can all pick it up and who picks it up early. Some might pick it up mid-season, could be late for some of these guys. And so maybe you see some early season struggles, which you saw from Georgia's defense in this last season. You know what I mean? Again, you've talked extensively about that extensive playbook and how thick it is in comparison to a lot of DCs out there. And this that youth in the secondary, when at that point in the season for Georgia, did you really start to notice like a big change? And again, this is completely different personnel at Texas, but I mean, it's still, it's going to be a similar playbook. You're going to have a lot of the same rules and concepts. What point did you really see that the lights kind of come on for the back end of that Georgia defense? Because I mean, they gave a lot of points and a lot of yards through the air early in that season, and even into SEC play a little bit. Just think of like the Tennessee game.
Yeah, so I think one of maybe what I would say there is I think it was almost the opposite. Like I don't think the playbook was dense enough early in the year for Georgia. I think they
Well,
were too simple early. I
is
think if
that
you
because they were
Yeah, I do
they
think that was
didn't?
a product of their youth. You go back and you look at that secondary last year for Georgia, it's Janelle Aguero, who was I think a true junior, Dalen Everett, true junior, KJ Bolden was a true sophomore, Kyron Jones was starting for the first time, and then it was Ellis Robinson, who hadn't started all year. So you're talking about 300 underclassmen. I do think that led to a playbook that really wasn't super expansive. Now, that is somewhat of a concern, I think, for Texas next year is not only is it a pretty young secondary, it's also it's also pretty new in terms of the playbook where yeah, you can spend a lot of time in the film room and you can do a lot of things on the whiteboard to tell the guys and you can work on your walkthroughs and your half line drills and all of the different stuff that goes into an install. But I mean, it's a lot of stuff that you're trying to get in there. So I do think you could potentially see the Texas defense early in the year really start off slow just because it is a lot to try to install all this stuff. Now, I will say one of the things that you'll hear a lot from guys if you talk to people at Georgia was Muschamp was in charge of simplifying the defense. So it could be that, Texas isn't going to install as much as Georgia traditionally would. And that may help in terms of, having the players play faster. And that gets Texas off to a quicker start because, you're not installing as much. So you're able to really learn those key concepts, get really good at them, and just run them. But that there's a little bit of a double-edged sword there because if you're not going to be super complex, you're pretty easy to play against. So there's a little bit of a double-edged sword there. And I think that's one of the big questions I'm going to have. And I don't know that it's going to be answered until, September is in terms of what Muschamp is doing.
Right. I mean, you'll see a lot of what he probably plans to do in that Ohio State game, but at the same time, it's going to be just a couple of weeks into the season. You're going to have SEC play behind you, and so it's not. I'm not saying you're going to hold any bullets back. I'm just saying you might not be ready to show the full arsenal yet. Like you're saying, Georgia was kind of limited in what they're doing early in last season compared to years past, and when Kirby has a group that maybe completely understands and comprehends everything that he's trying to get done, but. Yeah, I mean, I just had to ask because, again, I think I agree with you. I think you could see a Texas defense that, by fans' expectations, you get Will Muschamp in here. You've got Colin Simmons. You've got some of these other studs on the back end and a linebacker. You've got a Rasheem Biles and, all the talent in the edge room. And you give up a few points early on, and everybody's going to point with fingers at Will Muschamp and be like, hold on, like, what's going on? Like, so much deeper than that. And, again, that's the type of content you can find here with Pack and over at Inside Texas. But, let's go back to the other side of the ball real quick. And actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and do our first ad break of the night. We're going to hear from Mr. Devin McClellan, and we'll be right back.
Big financial decisions don't have to feel overwhelming. There's someone who can guide you every step of the way. David McClellan is a fiduciary financial advisor with Forum Financial, and he's working closely with his clients as a true financial life coach, guiding every aspect of your financial journey with expertise and care. If his name sounds familiar, that's because David was a swimmer at Texas and a member of several national championship teams. Today, he channels that same championship mindset into helping people win with their finances. David specializes in financial planning, and he's contributed numerous articles to Kiplinger on the topic of retirement tax bombs. And right now, David is offering viewers a free intro consultation to assess your financial situation. Do not miss this chance to get personalized guidance from a trusted expert. To schedule your free consult, email David at dmcclellan@forumfinancial.com, or you can call him directly at 312-933-8823. The contact info is in the description.
All right, Pac, I want to go back to the other side of the ball. The first name that you mentioned here tonight, Emmett Mosley. A guy that I was really excited about getting in the portal from Stanford, had over 500 yards, had a couple of big touchdowns. I liked that he could win. It was at Stanford, and it was against some DBs that I thought might have played it a little soft a couple times, but he not necessarily 50-50 balls, but battled to win balls in the air. I just really smooth as a route runner. Then he gets hurt. You miss early in the season in an offense that needed another wide receiver for sure. But then also you miss out on the time to really get that in-game rapport with Arch Manning. I thought he was a shot in the arm immediately when he came back for Florida. Now, again, we could talk about that game forever. You can pick on Sark for drawing up maybe too many deep concepts. You can obviously pick on the offensive line. You can pick on Arch maybe there at the end of the game for forcing things a little bit. Nobody was really without fault in that one. But Emmett Mosley, it felt like he was just running wide open the entire game. And again, there was times we got the ball to him, times we did not. But how much does he benefit from the addition to Cam Coleman, and then from the late season kind of rise of Ryan Wingo? What type of yardage for season wise are you expecting out of Emmett Mosley, and where do you think he's mostly going to help this team? Is it third down and moving the six? Is he going to be a guy that we can really trust in that scenario? Is it going to be a red zone target? What's up with your thoughts on Mr. Emmett Mosley?
Yeah, so I imagine he moves back to the slot, which I think is going to be a real benefit for him. If you go back and you watch him at Stanford, he's almost exclusively playing out of the slot. And then you watch him last year, and because of DeAndre Moore, he was playing out as the Z or the X more often, which really not where he's best. So I think that helps him a lot. Getting Cam Coleman allows him to then play in the slot, which will help him quite a bit, because when you're in the slot, you're playing a lot of guys who aren't great in coverage, right? If a nickel was really good in coverage, he'd likely be a boundary or field corner. If he was really good in coverage, he's probably not playing as a nickel, because most nickels in a lot of defenses, especially right now, nickels are run first players. They're typically force defenders. They're typically guys that are, playing the D gap, forcing the ball back inside. They don't typically have an immediate vertical responsibility. So when you do get into pass downs, a lot of the time you end up with pretty favorable matchups in terms of who the nickel is. Mm-hmm. So that's really big for him. I think that's going to be really important. From who Cam Coleman is, I do think it opens up a little bit more space from 10 to 20 yards, just because, Cam Coleman's going to do a lot of work vertically, whether that's with posts or goes or sluggos or hitch and goes or any form of double move. Just he's going to take up a lot of space vertically. And if he has a really good year, if he does what we kind of expect him to do, it's likely going to be a lot of double teams going to him, especially when, they get into 3-by-1 formations and it's Cam Coleman to the boundary. You're going to get a lot of good matchups in terms of teams are going to be doubling there. So now Emmett Mosley, if he's the 2 or the 3, he's either playing against a nickel or a linebacker, and, you tend to like those matchups, or it might be a safety if a team is rolling down a safety to him. But again, you typically like that matchup. You don't typically ask your safeties to play a lot of true man-to-man coverage. And so when you're seeing man, or you're seeing some form of man match coverage, whether that's 2 or 7, you're going to be in a good spot with Emmett Mosley. And then if they're in zone, I think, that's already where I think he has good feel for zones. I think he knows when to settle down. I do think he has to, next year, he really has to do a better job of attacking the football. I do think there's times where he waits for it to come to him. So,
Yeah.
that's one of those things you got to clean up. But outside of that, I think this is a really big move for him. And then about like 450 to 600 total yards. It's kind of a hard one to say just because, again, you do have Cam Coleman, and then you have Ryan Wingo.
You got Ryan Wingo, you've got Cam, and then you got freshmen, not won't be freshmen come season time, but you got youth underneath him that's game ready, and then you've got a super stud freshman coming in that you imagine Texas has some type of package for, and they show it early and try to get him on the field and figure out exactly how much he can help this team in 2026. And so it's going to be fun, but at the same time, like I almost feel for the guy because you're going to have fans calling for every name below him, and you're going to have guys that want him to go to Wingo and Cam Coleman on an every down basis. They're going to get theirs, and I think Emmett's going to get his as well and be a big part. I like him as far as the chain mover goes. I think he'll be really reliable in that situation. You talked about, paint me a picture, Coach Back. Texas is facing a 3rd and 4. Let's say this. So we'll just back it up a little bit because Sark's completely fine running on 3rd and 4, pretty much any side of the field. But let's go make it 3rd and 6. We've got Coleman to the boundary in a 3-by-1. So we're anticipating double there. What type of concept does Sark draw up to the trip side? What's he got Cam over there doing? Is he completely just trying to occupy that cornerback and safety or whoever that second double is? Or what are your thoughts there? What would you do as well? But I want what you think Sark might try to do.
So I'll start with how I would defend it, and then I'll say, here's how I would attack that.
Okay.
So one, I'm probably playing a double on Coleman, called a cone. So safety is reading the release of Coleman. If Coleman releases outside, he's working front side. If the corner is if Coleman releases inside, it's a double. So I'm running a cone there, and then to the backside or to the front side. Really, you're probably playing some form of quarters. I don't want to say, except that it's 3rd and 6. I don't know. This is where like it's a little bit of a cop out, but this is where game planning matters a lot, knowing what routes teams are running because I mean, there's like 17 different calls you can make here. I'll just pick one and I'll say maybe they're running Seahawk because we talked about it 2 Saturdays ago. So if you guys don't know what that is, you guys can go watch that. But if they're running Seahawk, the thing that beats that is 2 on a shallow. So, running some form of drive concept or levels concept where the 3 is running a dig, the 2 is running a shallow, the 1's running a post. Because really what's likely to happen is the safety drops down or he drives down on the dig. The 2, he's going to get open on the shallow because the star is outside leverage on him. So Emmett Mosley is the 2 in this case. He's going to have good leverage on the shallow. And I think that's actually a good route for him. I do think he's better after the catch than people give him credit for. If you remember the Georgia game, he had a play where he went for about 40 yards on a little shallow. It was a little bit of a busted play where Manning gets to maybe his 3rd or 4th read, throws it to Mosley, gets it about the 45 when they were backed up at their own 5. So running two on a shallow, and then you run the post with Wingo at 1. And really, because the safety bites down on the dig, if Mosley is able to get inside of the corner, that's a good read for Arch. So that would kind of be the concept that I think you'd want against that. But, kind of a long way to say it depends.
Yeah, no kidding, man. I knew that was going to be a fun answer. Again, just curious on how you feel about him. Sark in general, I think, obviously he's got a lot of tools in the bag, man. But Texas is still going to have to be efficient on the money downs. Something we've struggled a little bit with. I was here early last year. A little bit is being very generous to that offense because we were really, really bad. Again, Jermaine Bishop. We brought his name up a lot on the show. Everybody excited to get him around. What type of touch usage, touch volume would you give Jermaine as you kind of ease him into this offense? Obviously, people love to bring up, his size. Can he play at, 160 pounds? What will he be like in August? What type of weight do you think he can put on, for one, in that amount of time, but still be himself as an athlete? But then two, get into how you'd use him early in the season and what you think Texas might ultimately do.
Yeah, I mean, you hope you can get him around 175 minimum by the season. I just don't think you can play a guy who's less than that because, for one, there's not a chance you can ask him to block. And if you can't ask him to block, that kind of eliminates a lot of run concepts that you want. You really can't run outside zone because on a lot of outside zone plays, you're cracking. You're asking your slot to crack someone, whether that's the safety or a linebacker,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you get more to condensed sets. When you get into more condensed sets, you're asking your receivers to block, and you can't ask a 175-pound receiver to block anyone. Um, he tries to block a linebacker that's 240. It's more likely that linebacker shoves him 6 feet back. So you can't ask him to do that. So if he's 175, 180, you can at least put him out there on third down or as a gadget player. I do kind of think it's kind of tough because until he's big enough to be a good blocker, anytime he's out there, you've just got to kind of use him as a decoy. Or if you're gonna, try to get him the ball, it kind of becomes a tendency there.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I think it's got to be a little bit. You got to find that sweet spot where you've either got to do things to get him out of the blocking scheme, which is kind of hard if he's going to play in the slot and he's going to be, and Sark's going to stay with being a mostly condensed formation guy. That becomes really, really hard. Um, Otherwise, putting him in motion and using him as a decoy, maybe doing some stuff with rocket sweeps and then giving it to him or giving it to a back or running triple option off of that. I think that's kind of your next best option, but it's going to be pretty gadgety early just because right now you really can't ask him to do much more than that because like half of being a receiver is being a good blocker.
Yeah, I mean, and Sark asked a lot of his wide receivers, to block, and so again, he
Yeah.
he appreciates and demands physicality out there. I was thinking 180, so we're in the same ballpark there. Again, I know that he's going to put on some weight. Don't know exactly how much. You know that he's going to see the football. Don't know exactly how much, but I do agree that it'll be in a kind of gadget form. Early on in his time at Texas, maybe mid-season. He gets to a weight they feel comfortable giving him the ball. Maybe he's shown that he has, what it takes to get out there and contribute as a blocker in an offense. But definitely curious and interested to see how they use a Jermaine Bishop. But one thing I'll say is that, and I hate to say it because I'm going to sound like I'm a Niblet hater because I was saying this like a month ago on here. But yeah, we also need to see Bishop on special teams. I'm with you. I'm with you. Kick return, punt return from day one. I think that when we've had Ryan Niblett on offense, we've been very, very obvious in what we're trying to do in the last couple of years. Every time we got him on the ball, if we've used him as a decoy, it's been pretty poorly because the things we've done to him have not exactly worked. His success obviously has come last season in the kick return game. I just think there's a big difference in the type of athletes and the upside as a returner between Bishop and Ryan Niblett. So again, and yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Worthy was tiny out there, and now Worthy had a nastiness to him that he could get by as a blocker. He was far from a good blocker early in his career, but the effort was there. And then Bama had a slew of wide receivers at Sark's time where they were pretty small as well. But we'll see, man.
I would say also, I don't know that it was a good thing that Worthy was playing at 150 as a freshman. Like Texas was very, up and down offensively, and I don't know that you expect. That was also the Big 12, where almost nobody plays defense and physicality isn't really like a big thing. The SEC, you win by being the most physical team in the conference. This is what Georgia has been. This is what Alabama was under Saban. It's very rare that you win having 150-pound skill guys. Even those Bama teams with Sarkisian, you're talking about like Jalen Waddle or John Mechie. those guys are a lot bigger than 150. Those guys are, you look at Jalen Waddle and you see him in person, he's a really big guy. You do that with Jermaine Bishop, he's not. Like those
Waddle's
aren't.
Waddle's stick, man. He's got thick legs. Again, I think most people are talking about Devontae Smith. I mean, he was kind of the one exception you kind of have to that. But again,
And he was still, and like they did a lot of things with him to avoid him blocking.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, and there were so many weapons on that offense. They basically did whatever they want. I mean, they played around with people. That's one of the more elite offenses in college football history. And with that being said, let's go to our second ad break of the night. We're going to hear from Andre the lawyer. We'll be right back.
Texans know when you're injured, there's one name that gets results: Andre the lawyer. Trust the team that has secured millions for their clients and helped thousands of Texans win their injury cases. Car wrecks, slip and falls, 18-wheeler accidents, on-the-job injuries, wrongful deaths. Don't let the insurance companies tell you what your claim is worth. Andre the lawyer will fight for you. His principal office is in Dallas, but they serve Texans throughout the state. So don't wait. Call 214-444-8808. That's 214-444-8808. Contact info is in the description.
I will say, I mean, and I'm putting that comment back on there. It is nice to be in the spot that we were in at the wide receiver position compared to where we were when Sark came to town. Imagine that room if Texas doesn't flip Xavier Worthy from Michigan. Yeah, and again, I mean, that was a really fun freshman year, but a lot of times, man, we had to force feed the guy. I mean, there was the Kansas game. I think he had like 22 or 23 targets or something insane like that. But all right, Pac, let's move on here. We kind of talked about, some underrated guys that we'll think we see on each side of the ball. Is there anybody that comes to the top of your mind when we talk about guys that are going to make the biggest jump? It could be anybody. It could be Arch Manning. It could be Colin Simmons. It could be anybody on the roster. Biggest jumps that you see for Texas. Give me a couple names if you have any.
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind is Justice Terry and Lance Jackson. I think those two guys are going to really, really take a big leap. I think Cade Phillips too, for the same reason that I think Kobe Black should take a leap. I think you're going to see a much more DB friendly system, right? I think every DB wants to play man coverage. It's really appealing to their draft stock. It's a lot more fun than playing zone. You get to do a lot more. You're asked to. It's a little bit more of an ego bump to be an elite shutdown DB versus being a great zone corner.
Yeah,
I think so. Cade Phillips, I think, is going to take a real leap. I think just the measurables make you think that, right? He's 6'2". He's got freakishly long arms. He's got really fluid hips, which I think is probably the most important thing for a DB is having really flexible hips, being able to turn your hips, and whether that's with a speed turn or play out of half turns or be able to stay square, flip your hips to match what side a receiver breaks to, and then turn your hips to run, right? You're asked to do a lot of things with your hips, and he's got really fluid ones, which is really important there. So I think this will be really helpful for him. Justice Terry and Lance Jackson, especially Justice Terry, I think getting into more of the 3-down mid-front stuff where he's able to play as a 4-eye, I think that's really, really going to be good for him in terms of the snap count. I think his speed and he's not super heavy right now. I think he's about 275. You hope you can get him up to about 285, 290 sometime soon because you can play him at 4-eye and you can move him to 3-tech. And just with his speed and power, I think in terms of pound for pound, I think he's probably the best athlete on the D line.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree.
Which anytime you get him on the field more, that's a winning combination. Lance Jackson, I think again for the similar reasons to Justice Terry, I don't think he's as twitchy. I think there's a little bit more strength to his game, a little bit more power. I think he's a little bit more technically clean as well. So all of those are really, I think all those are going to be really beneficial for him, especially as a 4-eye, where a lot of it's about how strong you are. And if you're someone who can jack someone up and create a lot of vertical displacement and then fold into a gap, you're gonna have a really good time. I think Lance Jackson's got the profile for that. From a linebacker standpoint, I think Ty Anthony Smith's going to really benefit from this. I think from going from some of the stuff that PK did from a run fit perspective to a lot more of the stacking that Will Muschamp asked them to do, where it's vertical, then go up. I think Ty Anthony's going to have a lot more success with that because you saw when Texas blitzed Anthony Hill last year, a lot of the times Ty Anthony Smith was kind of roaming around, right? He was overlapping, he was tracking the back and then folding into a gap. This is now asking him to do that even more, which I think is really good for him.
Mhm.
So I think he's probably a guy that I expect to take a leap. Um, Trying to think of who else. I think Derek Williams is going to be a lot better now with Blake Gideon. That would be another name. I think that those feel like the names that most pressingly defensively I think are going to really see a benefit from the Muschamp edition.
Let me ask you this: where would you rank Texas's defensive line room amongst SEC defensive line rooms?
Um, so I would have them behind Georgia, probably behind Florida, and behind Ole Miss, and that's probably about it.
I think I had Georgia 1, Ole Miss 2, Texas 3, Florida 4. But it's nice to know I wasn't too far off from your thoughts because I respect your opinion more on the matter. Um, again, we talked about a lot of these
Oh,
guys.
actually, wait, I have to add one more. Probably Oklahoma. They're probably in that same tier.
That's
I just
fair.
remember they had David Stone and all those guys.
I
So
mean, that Oklahoma defense, I don't expect it to take too much of a step back. Are you thinking the same thing, or do you see more of a
yeah,
step back?
I think they're going to be fine. I think one, I think they're really really talented, which helps. I think they're going to be better in the back end this year than they were last year. 1 year older, a lot. I think that's really important. But David Stone was fantastic last year. He's probably going to end up being a top 15 pick. They lose R. Mason Thomas and they lose Jane Jackson, not Jane Jackson, but they lose the I forget his name, Dominic Williams.
Hmm.
But they're still bringing a lot back. I do think they get Jane Jackson back, which you combine that with David Stone. That's probably the best two that anyone in the SEC has.
Yeah, I've got a lot of respect for Jaden Jackson's game, and he has a very impressive motor on him. Um, Vic wants your thoughts on Zena. If you have any pack, what do you think? Is he going to take a big jump? I mean, obviously he's going to be a part of the future as far as that room. But what do you see him doing, particularly this next fall?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a weird one because if I'm not wrong, he's about 260, 265. I That's kind of a weird weight just because, when you bump into three down, if you're asking him to play as a four eye, that a lot of the times you're taking on double teams. And if you're 265 taking on 600 pounds of mass, you got to have tremendous pad level and a freakish amount of strength on you.
Yep.
So that makes it tough. And four down as an edge, I think he makes a lot of sense. But I think Justice Terry and Lance Jackson are more talented. So it's if he takes a jump and that's the reason why he's playing ahead of them, that's a great sign. But on the surface, just no, no extraordinary, no exponential growth from him. I think it's hard to immediately say he's gonna really step up and be a major contributor.
That's more than fair. Now let's go to a position group that everybody has question marks about, maybe a little more confidence than they did a couple of months ago. But the offensive line, you can't say Brandon Baker, you can't say Gooseby. Who takes the biggest step for Texas? Is it one of the expected starters? Is it is there somebody behind those guys on the depth chart that you think steps up and earns a job? What are your thoughts there?
It's a really good question because I think four of your spots really right now, and you almost know five if Seymour gets the
Right.
waiver, where kind of what it's going to look like. I think Seymour is going to be a really pleasant surprise for a lot of Texas fans. I don't think many people know, but the Football Writers Association of America had him as a second team All American throughout the entire country,
I didn't
right?
know
And
that.
that's across every country. That's across every conference. That's not just in wherever Western. That's not just in CUSA. That's across every single conference. So that should tell you a decent bit about what people think of Lawrence Seymour. So I think he's going to be a pleasant surprise. Brandon Baker, I'm not sure. We'll have to see what it looks like at guard. You hope in the spring he actually practices there. That's kind of that's an important thing to me is can he actually get snaps at guard? Because if he doesn't, I think it's hard to ask a guy to go from the summer to the fall playing guard and for that to be it. You'd really like to get 3 or 4 install periods worth of him playing at guard to really get comfortable there. So
You would think that even though you're going to have Goosey out, and when you get to spring practice, you would still stick, somebody else at tackle just so that you could have Baker playing where he's primarily going to play. Barring some crazy, injury, bad luck for Texas. You would think so, right? I mean, that seems pretty obvious, but at the same time, I guess we'll see. So no, it definitely matters. Yeah, I think that's a hang up with Baker. If he was still at right tackle, I think you would say I think that would have been fair for me to include him in my original comment or question rather. When I say you can't say his name, but it's fair to say it when he's being moved to guard and you really don't know what to expect there. But are there any of the guys you talk about, Jaden Chapman, you talk about the Coleman, any of those guys that maybe you've kind of grown on a little bit as far as when maybe they can help, maybe being earlier than expected?
yeah, truthfully, I don't really have a take on either the Coleman twins or any of those guys because you just haven't seen them play, right? And a lot of them are really young too. So you go from high school to college, there's a lot of development that needs to be taking place, and you don't know what that looks like. So it's a really tough one to say. I will say one of the guys that I think could, especially early, or that I'm most interested in the spring is what does it look like with John Turntine? What can he get up to from a weight standpoint? Can he get close to 300 pounds? If he can, I might try to move him to guard and try to see what it looks like. Give him a chance there because his movement skills are tremendous.
Right.
I think out of everyone in the class of 2026, he might have the best pure movement skills of anyone across the country at a line. So, that's a really good fit for a guard because you do a lot of pulling with them, especially with the power pass stuff that Texas does, where they pull a guard to the opposite edge, right? I think that could be a pretty good fit for him, especially in outside zone where, it's not so much about moving a guy 3 feet vertically, right? Moving a guy against their will. It's can we shove a guy off his track so that way we can open up a little bit of space for a back to
Right.
cut back. It's not about verticality. It's more about horizontal. It's more about horizontal movement, and that's where being really athletic is helpful. So John Turntine could be a guy that, if he gets up to weight and he gets a chance to play at guard, I don't know that I'd be surprised if, he's in the 2 deep by August and pushing for a potential starting spot if Lawrence Seymour doesn't end up getting the waiver.
If that's a big caveat there at the very end there, but again, it sounds like Pack is very high on John Durantine, as many were coming, or coming out of that recruitment. Man, that was definitely a big win for Texas. All right, Pack. I mean, I think we've kind of touched on both sides of the football. We've touched on the offensive line a little bit, which is obviously a big question mark. Talked a lot about some of the new guys that are coming in on the offensive line, but then also on the defensive side of the football. So yeah, man, thanks for taking the time to do this. I appreciate you guys watching. Vic, appreciate all the questions, my man, all you other guys for the support. And if you haven't done so, man, go again, hop on over to Inside Texas, subscribe for $1 and join us and hang out during this long and grueling off season. It is what it is. You can dress it up and say, it's not that bad. No, off seasons stink, but luckily we've got all types of hoops. We got the hardball, the softball team's playing great. So a lot of action to keep us occupied in the meantime. Any final words, Pack? Pax taps out, man. Go enjoy school, brother. Enjoy your weekend, and same for the rest of you guys. And we'll see you next time on Inside Texas.